They told you crypto was freedom, that it would destroy the old order, the banks, the elites, the gatekeepers. But the truth is older than the blockchain itself. Every revolution promises liberation. Every system that claims to decentralize, power ends up rebuilding hierarchy, just in code. Machiavelli would have understood this perfectly. He knew that power never disappears. It only changes architecture. The blockchain didn't erase rulers. It digitized them. It replaced crowns, with code and signatures with smart contracts. And yet the psychology remained the same. The many chasing belief, while the few write the rules of that belief. Crypto began as rebellion, a digital uprising against the empire of banks. It promised transparency, equality, autonomy. But soon, new princes emerged. Early miners, venture funds, and developers who controlled the protocols the world now trusted. They didn't seek profit first. They sought position. Because control over code is control over currency, and control over currency has always been control over civilization. This is the illusion of investment. The masses saw opportunity. The Machiavellians saw leverage. Where the crowd read white papers, the few read incentives. Where the crowd bought tokens, the few built networks. While you speculated, they engineered dependency. Every token was marketed as ownership. But most investors didn't own anything. They merely participated in someone else's architecture. Every decentralized platform had founders. Every DAO had hidden hierarchies. Every so-called trustless system required belief. And belief has always been the most profitable resource in history. Machiavelli once wrote that a wise ruler builds his fortress not in stone, but in loyalty. Crypto took that literally. The modern fortress isn't physical, it's psychological. Loyal communities defending their coins like crusaders, blind to the fact that the project's founders already exited silently with power intact. The illusion was perfect. You weren't buying assets. You were buying belonging. The charts, the volatility, the promise of making it, all weapons of emotional manipulation. Each spike triggered hope, each crash, panic. And in that storm of emotion, the few accumulated what really mattered. Attention, data, and influence, because in the age of information, attention is liquidity, and liquidity is power. While millions argued about price, the architects shaped the infrastructure, exchanges, wallets, protocols, and narratives. They became the invisible aristocracy of the digital age, the ones who could mint, freeze, list, or delist wealth with a single update. They don't sell coins, they sell belief systems. Each white paper is scripture. Each influencer is a missionary. Each community is a congregation. Crypto didn't eliminate the need for trust. It industrialized it, and the same Machiavellian law remains. Whoever defines trust, defines truth. The average investor believes they are early. But Machiavelli would laugh. He would whisper, "You are early only to someone else's exit." Because in every boom, there are two kinds of participants, the believers and the builders. The believers fuel momentum, the builders extract meaning. One trades emotion, the other information. Crypto, like Renaissance Florence, became a theater of ambition. Florence had the Medici, bankers who funded popes and kings while pretending to serve art. Crypto has the venture capitalists and whales funding freedom while accumulating invisible empires of control. Different century. Same pattern. The illusion of investment is psychological, not financial. You think you're buying in, but you're being bought into. You're becoming part of someone else's design. The blockchain promised a world without intermediaries. But intermediaries reappeared as exchanges, stablecoins, and custodial wallets. The powerful never lose control. They just change the interface. Machiavelli warned that power's greatest disguise is benevolence, that rulers maintain control best when they appear to empower the people. Crypto became the perfect execution of that idea, a system that makes you feel free while mapping every transaction you make. In the name of transparency, you gave away privacy. In the pursuit of decentralization, you accepted dependency on protocols you didn't write. In the chase for quick profit, you ignored the quiet consolidation of real power by those who built the code beneath your belief. And when the markets crash, when tokens vanish, when projects collapse, the architects remain untouched. Because they never traded on emotion, they traded on structure. They built the invisible plumbing of the next empire, and the crowd still calls it freedom. Machiavelli would have invested early, yes, but not for profit, for insight. He would have seen that this technology, like every system before it, was less about liberation and more about leverage. He would have understood that control now lies not in gold, not in governments, but in code, and in the psychology of those who believe in it. And he would have smiled at the brilliance, a world where people willingly build their own chains, digital, decentralized, and defended with pride. Because that is the highest form of power, when the prisoner guards his own cell believing it's a fortress. The world believes power comes from ownership. But Machiavelli knew the truth. Real power comes from infrastructure. In every age, the rulers are not the ones who compete in the market, but the ones who design the market. And in the digital age, the architects are no longer kings or bankers. They are builders of code, investors who design ecosystems so vast that everyone else must live inside them. Crypto promised a world without intermediaries, but in reality, it created new ones, faster, smarter, and less visible. Behind every decentralized network lies a small circle of architects, venture funds, core developers, and governance whales. They don't chase trends, they create them. They don't speculate, they strategize. While the crowd buys coins, they build kingdoms. Machiavelli would have smiled at the structure, because what better way to rule a people than to make them believe they are ruling themselves? Every blockchain begins with a white paper, a constitution written by invisible hands. Every community vote begins with rules encoded by those who wrote the code. It feels democratic, but the hierarchy is baked into the protocol. The founders decide the token supply, the governance model, the inflation rate. They set the chessboard before the first player arrives. And by the time the public joins, the game is already written. This is the architecture of financial influence, the power to shape the playing field while pretending to compete on it. Traditional empires used borders. Digital empires use code. They don't need armies, only algorithms. They don't enforce taxes. They collect fees. They don't pass laws. They update protocols. The genius of this new system is that it hides control inside efficiency. Automation, they call it. Smart contracts, they celebrate. But beneath the elegance lies the same dynamic Machiavelli described in The Prince, the few who rule quietly through the mechanisms everyone else depends on. Consider stablecoins, the supposed neutral currency of the blockchain. Their creators decide peg mechanisms, collateral types, and redemption rules. They sit at the invisible intersection between code and capital, central banks disguised as software, and every trader, every transaction, every decentralized app ends up orbiting them. It is not ownership of wealth that defines modern power. It is ownership of the rails through which wealth flows. This was always Machiavelli's insight. He wrote that the most secure ruler controls not through fear, but through necessity. When people need you, they will obey without realizing it. That's how influence operates in crypto. The whales and protocols don't need to command. They only need to be indispensable. When the crowd calls it network effect, the strategist calls it dependency. You can see it in DeFi governance. A few wallets hold the majority of votes. A few funds shape the roadmaps. The illusion of democracy conceals a monarchy of capital, elegant, mathematical, irreversible. Every proposal, every community decision bends toward the architecture that was designed to maintain the original hierarchy. Even open source isn't truly open when the narrative is controlled. Because control in the digital age is psychological before it is technical. Machiavelli warned that perception is more powerful than truth, and crypto proved it. The idea of decentralization became more valuable than decentralization itself. Projects speak of empowering the people, but most people cannot read the code. They trust the words, not the architecture. And trust, once again, becomes the leash. The wealthy don't accumulate coins, they accumulate protocols. They don't invest in tokens, they invest in infrastructure. They don't play the market, they own the exchange. The public thinks in terms of price. The powerful think in terms of plumbing. Just like the Medici families of Renaissance Florence, who controlled popes and princes through banking networks, today's digital oligarchs control liquidity, governance, and narrative through layers of ownership too complex to see. They sponsor developers, they control treasuries, they seed protocols that interlock like gears in a silent machine. When retail investors check the charts, the real rulers check the parameters, because whoever can adjust the parameters, block rewards, inflation schedules, governance thresholds, already owns the game. This is how power becomes architecture. It doesn't argue, it configures. It doesn't demand obedience, it embeds it. Crypto's greatest promise was freedom. Its greatest success was compliance disguised as participation. Machiavelli once wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But the new rulers learned to do both. They built systems so addictive, so self-affirming, that fear and love merged into loyalty. Users defend the very structures that extract from them, believing they are fighting for liberation. This is the modern genius of influence, the architecture of obedience hidden within innovation. But here lies the paradox. The same architecture that enslaves also enables awareness. Because once you see the design, you can begin to build your own. Once you understand the incentives, you can detach from them. Once you study the code, you realize that power was never about technology. It was about psychology. Machiavelli would not have rejected crypto. He would have mastered it. He would have become an architect and not a trader. He would have understood that the blockchain is not a revolution, but a renaissance of control, coded, efficient, and eternal. And he would whisper, as he always has, "The wise do not fight for access to the kingdom. They build the walls that define it." The market doesn't trade in coins. It trades in emotion. Every chart you see, every green candle, every crash, it's not data. It's a reflection of collective psychology, greed rising, fear collapsing, hope resetting. And in that endless cycle, a new class of Machiavellians emerged, the ones who realized that price is never about value. It's about control. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler must study the hearts of men more than their laws. Modern investors have perfected that art. They don't study technology, they study behavior. They watch liquidity like a psychologist studies breath. They don't predict markets, they provoke them. In crypto, this is clearer than ever. Every token, every protocol, every innovation lives and dies by belief. It doesn't matter what the white paper says. What matters is what people feel when they read it. The crowd calls it hype. The strategist calls it leverage. Because emotion is the most efficient leverage in the digital age. The Machiavellian investor doesn't chase narratives, he creates them. He understands that volatility isn't risk, it's opportunity disguised as chaos. When others panic, he studies. When others celebrate, he sells. Because he knows that markets are human before they are mathematical. Look closer. Crypto is not just financial, it's theatrical. Every launch is a performance, every founder a character, every roadmap a myth designed to guide emotion, and every community a congregation waiting for prophecy. This is not new. It's Florence reborn. Back then, the Medici used art and religion to control hearts. Now the digital elite use tokens and narratives to do the same. The mediums changed, the psychology didn't. Scarcity, hype, FOMO, redemption, collapse, resurrection. Each cycle follows the same emotional choreography. The players change, the story doesn't. The masses believe wealth is about possession. The Machiavellian knows wealth is about position, and position is psychological. It's built by patience in a field of panic, by discipline in a storm. Of greed, you cannot control markets, but you can control your reaction to them. And in that small act of restraint lies the seed of sovereignty, because fear makes you fast, greed makes you blind, but stillness makes you powerful. That is the essence of leverage, not borrowed money and borrowed emotion. The ability to let others react while you remain calm enough to profit from their confusion. In every crash, the same drama unfolds. The crowd screams, manipulation, and they are right. But they misunderstand who the manipulator truly is. It's not a single entity or trader. It's the design itself, the architecture of volatility, a playground built for the cold and the patient. Machiavelli taught that a prince should never waste a crisis. The crypto elite learned that every crisis creates consolidation. Each crash washes away the weak hands, the impatient, the emotional, and from their ashes, the architects buy the ruins cheaply, rebuilding empires from collective despair. This is how power compounds. Not through luck, but through understanding the psychology of others. The market is not unfair, it's human, and humanity, when mapped through price charts, becomes predictable. The Machiavellian sees it like weather, chaotic on the surface, patterned beneath. He doesn't fear the storm, he waits for it, because storms are where kingdoms are built. Every panic creates redistribution. Every euphoric wave hides extraction. Every correction rewards patience and punishes emotion. The market doesn't move money, it moves power. And power always flows to the observer, not the participant. That's why Machiavelli's wisdom still applies. The wise man acts in times of calm to prepare for times of storm. In crypto, that means mastering psychology, not of the chart, but of the self. Most lose money not because they misunderstand the market, but because they misunderstand themselves. The masses crave quick validation. They confuse activity with progress. They chase momentum to silence anxiety. But the Machiavellian learns to detach emotion from outcome. He treats patience as leverage, silence as signal, restraint as strategy. He knows the market is a mirror, and in that reflection, he studies human nature. Every spike is vanity, every dip is fear, every rug pull is trust misplaced, and so he stops reacting. He becomes still, and in stillness, he sees what others miss, that markets are not battles of logic, they are theaters of emotion. And the calmest actor always wins. Leverage is not about debt or position size, it's about influence, the ability to make others move first, to sell when they buy, to wait when they rush, to predict not through numbers, but through patterns of panic. Crypto markets made this visible to the world. The whales move not with genius, but with discipline. They don't predict better, they simply wait longer. And waiting in a system built on emotion is the ultimate act of dominance. Machiavelli would have seen traders as soldiers in a silent psychological war, each one fighting not for territory, but for validation. He would have written a new chapter for the prince. The market rewards not the bold, but the unshaken. The truth is simple but brutal. Wealth flows to the few who understand emotion is leverage, and power flows to those who can remain unmoved while others panic. Because in the chaos of greed and fear, silence becomes command, and command becomes profit. That is the Machiavellian mind at work. Cold, calm, and infinitely patient. He doesn't fight the psychology of the market. He uses it. He knows that perception drives price, and perception, once understood, can be engineered. So he doesn't shout his moves. He designs environments where others reveal theirs. He doesn't trade the coin, he trades the crowd, and in that silence, the truth whispers. The real leverage isn't financial, it's psychological. Because whoever owns emotion owns the market. Every empire needs a ruler. But the rulers of today are faceless. They don't sit on thrones or appear in portraits. They move in wallets, signatures, and votes recorded on chains that never forget. They are the new princes, investors without titles, sovereigns without borders. Crypto promised a world without kings. And yet the thrones returned, built not from marble and crown, but from liquidity pools and venture capital rounds. The unseen investor is not loud. He does not tweet his moves. He funds the ones who do. He speaks rarely, but his influence echoes in every new protocol, every trending token, every community decision that seems spontaneous but isn't. Machiavelli would have recognized him instantly, because the unseen investor rules exactly as the prince advised, through dependence. He funds the revolution, then owns the rails it runs on. He builds belief, then quietly monetizes obedience. He doesn't conquer, he cultivates. He knows That loyalty bought through profit lasts only until the next crash, but loyalty built through architecture endures. This is the empire of modern finance, invisible, efficient, unaccountable. Look beneath the surface of any decentralized network. You'll find a small constellation of wallets that vote on every proposal, approve every treasury move, steer every protocol upgrade. The headlines say community governance. The ledgers reveal financial monarchy. Exchanges act as the new castles, fortified with liquidity, protected by legal moats. They decide what coins exist, what markets live or die, what trends the masses will see. Every listing, every delisting, every algorithmic tweak is an act of silent policy. And behind those acts, the same investors sit, the invisible patrons of the digital renaissance. They don't care which coin wins as long as the kingdom remains theirs. They fund competitors, hedge every side, and profit from both panic and euphoria. Because when you own the marketplace, volatility becomes revenue. The blockchain records every move, yet reveals nothing of intent. Transparency has become camouflage. Every transaction is visible, but the meaning behind it remains encrypted in psychology. The unseen investor doesn't hide his actions. He hides his motives. This is the new brilliance of control. The old elites used secrecy. The new ones use overexposure. They drown you in data until you stop asking where it leads. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler should appear virtuous while remaining strategic. Crypto perfected that idea. Today's unseen investors sponsor open source innovation, financial inclusion, community ownership. All noble banners, but behind each is leverage, not liberation. They let the crowd speak as long as they can shape the echo. The DAO was meant to be democracy on chain. In practice, it became oligarchy quantified. Token holders equate votes with power. But the real power belongs to those who can buy the most votes. Governance tokens created a system where wealth and voice merged, and the rich became policymakers without office. It's Florence reborn. Back then, the Medici bankrolled republics, popes, and wars, all while maintaining the image of humble servants of trade. Today's VCs and crypto funds play the same game. They build empires behind founders, protocols, and influencers, shaping markets through belief rather than decree. The modern investor doesn't need armies. Liquidity is his army. Attention is his propaganda. Narrative is his weapon. And data is his map. He funds chaos because volatility breeds opportunity. He funds order because order ensures continuity. He funds both sides because control lies not in victory but in balance. Machiavelli warned that the wise ruler keeps oppositions alive, never too strong to threaten, never too weak to vanish. The unseen investor obeys this law. He seeds competition, but connects them all through shared capital, ensuring that no matter who wins, the throne remains stable. And when a system collapses, a token, a project, a dream, he rebuilds it from the rubble. Because collapse is not failure in his empire, it's renewal, a ritual of destruction that clears the stage for the next illusion. He never panics, he never apologizes, he simply rotates power from one narrative to the next. This is not conspiracy, it's strategy, the cold application of timeless psychology in a new technological theater. The blockchain promised transparency, but transparency without comprehension is noise. The people can see the code, but they can't read the incentives behind it. And incentives are where control hides. So the unseen investor builds his empire not on secrecy, but on complexity. He makes the system too intricate for emotion to question, too technical for morality to penetrate, too efficient for rebellion to feel justified. And when the crowd cheers the next bull run, he watches quietly. He knows that enthusiasm is just leverage, emotion he can convert into capital. Because in a market where everyone sees everything, the only true advantage is interpretation. And interpretation belongs to the calm, the informed, the strategic, to the Machiavellians of finance. You can trace their influence through every blockchain merger, every liquidity crisis, every black swan event that always seems to benefit the same few. They are not criminals, they are craftsmen. They sculpt the flow of belief the way the old masters sculpted marble. They understand the first law of modern power: visibility is vulnerability. And the greatest strength is to move so quietly that people mistake your control for destiny. The empire of the unseen investor has no capital city, no flag, no anthem. It lives in code, policy, and human nature. And as long as people believe the system is free, the system will remain theirs. Because the most efficient ruler isn't the one who forbids rebellion. It's the one who makes rebellion profitable. And in that silence, the truth whispers, decentralization was never the end of power. It was the evolution of it. The invisible empire has no king because every believer became part of its crown. There is a pattern that repeats through every age. Empires rise, collapse, and rise again, not because men forget history, but because power rewrites it. Crypto was born from rebellion, but rebellion without understanding always becomes raw material for someone else's design. Machiavelli would have seen this clearly. He would have studied the new world of code and capital and smiled, because nothing had changed, only the language, only the interface. The crowd still chases freedom. The few still build the walls that define it. And in between stands the strategist, the one who sees both. This is the Machiavellian blueprint for modern power: to stop fighting inside systems and start designing them, to detach from emotion and master incentive, to understand that wealth is not the goal, it's the disguise. Power today isn't enforced with soldiers. It's enforced with systems, networks of belief sustained by code and commerce. And the rulers are those who understand that systems are stronger than empires because they don't need loyalty. They only need participation. Crypto made this truth visible. Every token, every exchange, every governance vote revealed the same law Machiavelli discovered in Florence, that people will trade freedom for a sense of control and obedience for a promise of prosperity. The illusion of ownership replaced by the comfort of belonging. The rich didn't fight against decentralization. They invested in it. They knew the rebellion could be monetized, that the idealists would build infrastructure for their own subjugation. They funded the tools that promised liberation, because whoever funds the revolution owns the outcome. Machiavelli would have called it the art of silent dominion, the ability to govern through ideals rather than laws, to turn virtue into currency and faith into fuel. The blueprint begins with detachment. You must learn to see systems not as moral but mechanical. Crypto is not good or evil. It is neutral architecture. The morality lies in who configures it and to what end. The Machiavellian doesn't react to systems, he reverse engineers them. He studies their incentives, identifies their leverage points, and then designs parallel structures that bend those incentives toward his advantage. He doesn't need to own everything. He only needs to own the foundation that everything else stands on. In crypto, that means understanding the code of human behavior: greed, fear, impatience, pride. These are the protocols that truly govern markets, and whoever masters these protocols controls the flow of digital power. He invests not in coins, but in comprehension, not in trends, but in time, because every cycle of panic and euphoria reveals who understands the system and who merely participates in it. Machiavelli's writings were never about cruelty. They were about clarity. He believed that understanding human nature without illusion was the highest form of intelligence. And the crypto world, with its volatility, its chaos, its endless promises, is a perfect mirror of that nature. The new Machiavellian learns to stand outside the storm. He moves slower. He studies deeper. He acts less. But each act reshapes the landscape. Because he no longer plays the game of profit, he plays the game of position. He knows that volatility is not chaos, it's energy. And energy, once harnessed, can be redirected. So he builds systems that channel emotion into structure. He designs platforms, narratives, and networks that others will maintain for him, willingly, enthusiastically. He doesn't suppress belief, he curates it. He doesn't eliminate competition, he funds it. He doesn't silence critics, he converts them into marketing. That's how power behaves in the digital age, not through suppression, but through saturation. The system doesn't need to be secret if it's everywhere. The Machiavellian blueprint is not about domination. It's about design. It's about recognizing that power now flows through interfaces, not institutions, that the new thrones are built from liquidity, data, and trust, that every wallet is a voter and every protocol is a government. He doesn't seek to escape this system, he learns to architect within it, because the only true freedom left is in creation. When you design something others depend on, you transcend the market and become its author. And that is the highest evolution of power, to become invisible, indispensable, and irreplaceable. Crypto, for all its illusions, revealed this possibility. That one can build entire nations without land, economies without borders, belief systems without priests. But to do so requires more than intelligence. It requires detachment, the ability to build systems that serve others while serving your strategy. Machiavelli would call it the art of governing without governing, a world where control no longer requires authority, only architecture. He would remind you that true sovereignty begins when you stop identifying with the crowd, when you stop chasing the same promises, freedom, profit, inclusion, and start asking, who profits from the belief itself? That is where the blueprint begins. Detach from narrative, observe incentive, design structure, control flow. That is how kings are made in the digital age, not through lineage, but through leverage, because in this new world, the throne is not inherited, it is coded. And the crown is invisible, a loop of belief around the minds of billions. Machiavelli would not have invested in tokens, he would have invested in trust itself, the mechanism that drives every exchange, every protocol, every empire. Because he knew that while currencies collapse, human nature endures, and whoever masters it, masters everything. Crypto, then, is not the future of money. It is the future of power, programmable, psychological, perpetual. And when you understand that, you stop playing for profit. You start building for permanence, because the game was never about who wins the bull run. It was about who writes the next one. And in that silence, the truth whispers, power doesn't chase wealth. Power creates the conditions that define it. And Machiavelli would have invested early, not in profit, not in fame, but in the one currency that never crashes, control. You've seen the pattern now, the cycle that never ends, belief, rebellion, control, rebirth. From kings to coders, from gold to crypto, the faces changed, but the psychology never did. Power isn't held, it's designed. The ones who rule don't compete for wealth. They construct the systems that define it, and the rest simply live inside the architecture of their vision. But awareness breaks the spell. Once you see the strings, you stop dancing. Once you study the design, you stop being its subject. That's where freedom begins. Not in the market, not in the money, but in the mind. Because the final investment is not capital, it's consciousness. If you've come this far, you've already stepped outside the illusion. You've begun to see through the metrics, the noise, the narrative. So stay, keep thinking, keep watching. Because this isn't a channel, it's a circle, a quiet rebellion against distraction, a sanctuary for those who still think in centuries, not seconds. Subscribe, not for content, but for clarity. Because awareness compounds faster than wealth. And silence is the only currency they can't control.